Zuri Ndlovu sat at the long dining table, the crystal glasses catching the warm glow of the chandelier. The room buzzed with laughter, the air thick with expensive perfume and polished charm. It was supposed to be a special night, their 10th anniversary. But Tobias, her husband, barely looked up from his phone. He was surrounded by his business partners, men who hung on his every word, their wives trying to impress her with fake smile. Zuri leaned in slightly, her voice calm but tired. "Tobias, can we talk for a minute? You've been distant lately." He finally looked at her, a smirk playing on his lips. Then, in front of everyone, he said, "Zuri, please. I'd rather hug a dog than deal with your clinginess tonight." The room erupted in laughter. Cameras flashed. Someone even clinked a glass. Zuri froze, her smile locked in place while her heart cracked quietly inside her chest. Every eye at the table was on her, watching, judging, enjoying the spectacle. When the guests finally left, she approached him. Her voice was low but firm. "You crossed a line tonight." He didn't even bother looking up from his drink. "You crossed it the day you thought you were my equal." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Later, when the house went silent, Tobias snored softly in their bed while Zuri sat by the window. The city lights flickered in the distance. Tears ran down her face, quiet, controlled, but endless. And then, somewhere between pain and anger, something inside her shifted. She wiped her face, straightened her back, and whispered to herself, "Never again." People often called Zuri Ndlovu a trophy wife. They saw her diamonds, her elegant dresses, her quiet smile, but not the mind that built the empire they all admired. Long before she became Mrs. Tobias Ndlovu, she was the founder of a small but rising logistics company called Zurilink Africa. She built it from scratch, managing routes, negotiating contracts, and creating smart systems that helped African suppliers reach global market. That company was her pride, her proof that she could stand on her own. Then came Tobias, charming, confident, and already successful, or so she thought. When they married, he convinced her to sell her shares. "It's better for the family," he'd said. "We shouldn't compete. We should combine forces." She believed him. She trusted that love and partnership meant sacrifice. So she let it go. Years later, sitting in the grand mansion that success had bought them, Zuri began to realize she was being erased. Tobias no longer asked her opinion in meetings. Her access to company files was quietly removed. Her name disappeared from projects she'd once led. At first, she thought it was just distance, maybe pride. But soon she understood. He'd locked her out completely. Late at night, after he fell asleep, she began digging. She called old partners and accountants. She traced contracts she once signed, looking for her name. She went through files she'd secretly copied and hidden years ago, just in case. What she found made her blood run cold. Tobias had registered several of her patents under his own name. The logistics algorithms she designed, the ones that transformed the company, now showed him as the sole creator. Her old company, Zurilink Africa, had been quietly merged into his corporation using forged signatures and falsified documents. It wasn't a partnership. It was theft. And then came the final blow. Through one of her contacts, she learned he was planning to divorce her, right before finalizing a billion-rand merger. If the divorce went through first, she'd walk away with nothing. No shares, no company, no legacy, just a headline calling her the ex-wife of Tobias Ndlovu. Her hands trembled as she read the emails, but her face stayed calm. Years of swallowing pain had trained her well. She closed her laptop, stood in front of the mirror, and stared at her reflection. The woman everyone thought was just a pretty accessory. When Tobias came home that night, she greeted him like always, polite and graceful. But inside, something new was burning, a quiet, steady fire. Later, when she finally spoke aloud, her voice was cold and certain. "You took my name off everything, Tobias," she said softly. "But you forgot who built the foundation." For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt awake, and she knew the game was about to change. Lindau had worked for the Ndlovus for 12 years. She had watched the family rise, watched Tobias turn from a charming husband into a man who spoke to Zuri like she was invisible. She'd seen the way Zuri's laughter faded over the years, how she moved around the mansion quietly, almost like a guest in her own home. Lindau never said a word, but she noticed everything. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Lindau stayed behind to finish cleaning Tobias's office. The room smelled of expensive cigars and whiskey. His desk, always neat, had one drawer slightly open. She hesitated for a moment, then curiosity got the better of her. Inside, she saw a small stack of USB drives, a leather ledger, and a folder marked with strange codes and numbers. Something about it didn't feel right. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the ledger. Offshore accounts, wire transfers, names of companies she'd never heard of, all tied to Tobias. It was more than just secret money. It looked like evidence of something big, something illegal. She knew she was crossing a line, but she also knew Zuri deserved the truth. Lindau took out her phone and began snapping photos of everything, page by page, file by file. She carefully placed everything back where it was, closed the drawer, and locked it. Her heart raced as she walked out, pretending nothing had happened. The next morning, while Tobias was at work, Lindau found Zuri in the garden. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then handed her the phone. "Ma'am, I need you to see this," she whispered. Zuri scrolled through the photos, her expression changing from confusion to shock. "He's hiding money," she said quietly. "Billions." Lindau crossed her arms, shaking her head. "Ma'am, I always knew the devil was wearing your husband's suit." For a long time, Zuri just sat there, staring at the images. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about betrayal layered deep beneath years of manipulation. All this time, Tobias had not only stolen her ideas but built his fortune on lies. She closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, and when she opened them again, her face had changed. The hurt was still there, but now there was something else, resolve. "Thank you, Lindau," she said softly. "You may have just given me the truth I needed." Lindau nodded, her voice low but steady. "I'll stand with you, ma'am, whatever comes." Zuri looked out over the ocean from the garden terrace, the waves crashing against the cliffs below. For the first time, she didn't feel powerless. She wasn't planning revenge, she was preparing justice. Tobias had built his empire on her work, her silence, and his deceit. Now she finally knew how to make him face it all. Zuri told everyone she was flying to Lagos to visit family. It was the perfect cover, no one would question it. But this wasn't a family trip. She was there to meet someone she hadn't spoken to in years, Chuka Obi, her old mentor, and one of the few people she still trusted. Chuka had been the first to believe in her when she started ZuriLink Africa. He'd taught her how to read financial reports, negotiate deals, and never sign anything she didn't understand. When she arrived at his quiet office in Victoria Island, he greeted her with surprise and warmth. "Zuri Ndlovu," he said, smiling. "The last time I saw you, you were running circles around investors." She didn't smile back. "I wish this visit was about business, Chuka, but it's about betrayal." They sat down, and Zuri pulled out her laptop. One by one, she opened the files, the photos Lindau had taken, the ledgers, the forged contracts, the secret accounts. Chuka's smile faded as he scrolled through the evidence. His eyebrows furrowed deeper with every document. "Zuri," he finally said, his voice heavy. "He built his empire on your ideas and illegal transactions. If this goes public, he's finished." Zuri leaned back, her voice calm but sharp. "I don't want him ruined. I want him exposed." Chuka studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're not here for revenge," he said. "You're here for justice." Together, they began to map out a plan. Chuka used his connections in finance and cybersecurity to trace Tobias's offshore account. They tracked fake shell companies, falsified contracts, and backdoor deals used to clean dirty money. Zuri provided insider details, the projects, the partners, the timing of the merger that was about to make Tobias untouchable. It took them days of work, encrypted calls, hidden meetings, and long nights staring at screens filled with numbers and secrets. Piece by piece, they built a case so strong it could tear his entire empire apart. "Once we leak this," Chuka said one evening, rubbing his tired eyes, "the regulators will freeze everything. But we have to do it smart. If we move too early, he'll bury the evidence. Too late, and he'll disappear with the money." Zuri nodded. "It has to happen when everyone's watching him, when he's at his highest point." Chuka looked up. "The merger celebration." Zuri's lips curved into a faint smile. "Exactly. The night he finally believes he's won." They both knew it was risky. If Tobias found out before then, he would destroy them both. But Zuri wasn't the same woman who sat in silence while her husband mocked her. This time, she was ready to fight back, not with rage, but with truth. As she packed to return to Cape Town, Chuka looked at her and said quietly, "Zuri, once this starts, there's no going back." She met his gaze without hesitation. "I have no reason to go back, Chuka. My life starts when his lies end." The mansion buzzed with excitement that morning. Staff rushed through the halls carrying designer suits, polished shoes, and bottles of champagne. Tobias Ndlovu was preparing for the biggest night of his career, the signing of a $700 million luxury real estate merger with foreign investors. Reporters were already outside, eager to capture the man of the hour. Zuri watched him from across the room as he adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror. Every move he made was calculated, every smile rehearsed. He looked powerful, unstoppable, exactly how he wanted the world to see him. But she saw the man behind the image, the one who'd built his empire on lies. Tobias turned to her, his tone cold and dismissive. "After tonight, you'll have no place in my life," he said. "The divorce papers will arrive tomorrow." Zuri didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled faintly, her eyes steady on him. "Then tonight will be unforgettable," she replied softly. He smirked, thinking she was finally accepting her fate, and walked out the door with his team. The sound of his car fading down the driveway felt like the closing of a long, painful chapter. As soon as he was gone, the mansion's calmness shifted. Zuri turned to Lindai, who was already waiting by the study with a laptop. The two women exchanged a quiet nod, the signal to begin. They moved quickly and quietly. Lindai connected an encrypted drive to the computer, while Zuri double-checked the files one last time. Bank statements, forged contracts, secret transactions, all tied to Tobias. Each document told a story of greed and betrayal. Zuri clicked send. One by one, the emails flew out to investigative journalists, regulators, and financial authorities. Every message was encrypted, every file verified. The whistleblower network received the bulk of it, thousands of pages of proof that could crumble Tobias's empire overnight. Lindai watched the progress bar on the screen. "It's done, ma'am," she said quietly. Zuri exhaled, feeling both light and heavy at once. "Now we wait." They deleted every trace of their activity and locked away the backups in a hidden safe. Outside, the evening sky began to darken, painting Cape Town in gold and deep orange. Somewhere across the city, Tobias was probably raising a glass, charming his investors, completely unaware that the ground beneath him was starting to crack. Zuri stood by the window, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. "For years, he controlled the story," she said softly. "Tonight, the truth will tell itself." Lindai stepped beside her, calm and loyal as ever. "He won't see it coming," she said. Zuri nodded. "He doesn't have to. It's already happening." By midnight, the files were in motion, shared, mirrored, and impossible to erase. The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back. The Table Bay Hotel glittered like a diamond that night. Luxury cars lined the entrance, photographers flashed their cameras, and the city's elite arrived in gowns and tuxedos. It was the event of the year, Tobias and Lova's grand merger celebration. Inside, golden chandeliers shimmered over crystal glasses and designer suits. Tobias stood at the center of it all, confident and charming, shaking hands with foreign investors and posing for pictures as if the world belonged to him. He gave a short speech, his voice booming through the hall. "Tonight marks a new chapter for Tobias Holdings," he declared proudly. "We are building Africa's future." The room erupted in applause. But as the clapping faded, the giant LED screens behind him began to flicker. A low hum filled the room. At first, everyone thought it was a technical glitch. Then the screen switched. Instead of the company logo, a series of documents appeared: bank records, wire transfers, signed contracts. The crowd fell silent. The documents zoomed in, revealing forged signatures, offshore accounts, and hidden transactions, all under Tobias's name. People gasped. Cameras came up. Phones started recording. The investors turned to each other in confusion. Tobias froze, his confident smile collapsing. "Turn that off," he barked at the technicians, but it was too late. Every screen in the ballroom now showed evidence of his corruption, his greed, his lies. And then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke. Calm, steady, unmistakable. "You said you'd rather hug a dog than deal with me, Tobias." All eyes turned. Zuri Ndlova stepped forward, dressed in a sleek black gown that shimmered under the lights. She walked slowly, gracefully, like a woman who had waited a long time for this moment. "I hope they're loyal," she said, her eyes locked on him. "Because tonight, they'll be your only friends." The room exploded into whispers and camera flashes. Tobias tried to speak, but his words stumbled. "Zuri, what have you done?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was already on every screen. The evidence she'd sent earlier that day had spread like wildfire to regulators, journalists, and investors. The empire he built on stolen work and hidden money was crumbling in real time. Security rushed forward, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Tobias resisted at first, but his investors backed away, refusing to meet his eyes. The same people who had laughed with him an hour ago now stared as if he were a stranger. As the police led him out, the crowd erupted. Flashes, shouts, chaos. Reporters followed him into the hotel lobby, their questions cutting through the air. "Mr. Ndlovu, are the allegations true? Did your wife expose you?" Zuri stood quietly at the center of it all, calm and unshaken. The screens behind her still played the evidence, each file sealing his downfall. For the first time in years, she wasn't standing in his shadow. She was standing in her power. And the night that was supposed to crown Tobias king instead became the night his empire burned. Within 48 hours, the empire that once looked unshakable began to crumble like sand in the wind. Tobias Holdings, the pride of the luxury world, collapsed almost overnight. The morning after the scandal broke, regulators froze all his bank accounts. By afternoon, the board of directors resigned one by one. The billion-rand merger that was supposed to crown Tobias's career was officially canceled before it even began. The headlines spread like wildfire across Africa and beyond. Luxury mogul exposed by wife's evidence. From power to prison, Tobias Ndlova's fall. News stations replayed the footage from the Table Bay Hotel. The moment the screens lit up, the look on Tobias's face, and Zuri stepping into the spotlight in that black gown. The world couldn't stop talking about her. On social media, her name trended for days. Some called her the Ice Queen, calm, elegant, untouchable. Others called her the woman who fought back. Comment sections filled with debates about love, betrayal, and power. People admired her bravery. A few criticized her for destroying her husband, but Zuri didn't respond to any of it. While the world obsessed over her story, Zuri stayed quiet. The mansion that had once echoed with tension now felt still. No shouting, no pretending, no fear. Just silence, the kind that felt like peace. She spent her days sitting in the garden, sipping tea under the shade of the old jacaranda tree. The city's chaos felt far away. Lindai often joined her, bringing fresh scones or a newspaper folded neatly under her arm. One afternoon, she sat across from Zuri and asked softly, "Ma'am, everyone's calling you a hero. Are you happy now?" Zuri looked up from her teacup, a small smile touching her lips. "Happy," she repeated. She paused for a moment, watching the sunlight spill across the flowers. "No, Lindai, justice isn't joy. It's peace." She set the cup down gently, "And peace finally feels like mine." Lindai nodded, understanding more than words could express. Around them, the world went on, the ocean waves crashing in the distance, the faint sound of birds, the wind carrying away the last traces of the life Zuri had outgrown. Meanwhile, news networks continued to broadcast updates. Tobias had been questioned by investigators. His assets were under review. Luxury cars repossessed. His penthouse sealed off. The empire he'd built on deception was gone, stripped bare in front of the entire world. Zuri didn't watch any of it. She didn't need to. The truth had done its work. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small, unseen, or silenced. She wasn't the woman behind the empire anymore. She was the woman who survived it. And in the quiet of her garden, surrounded by peace she'd fought so hard to reclaim, Zuri finally breathed freely again. Months passed, and the storm finally settled. Tobias's name had faded from the headlines, but Zuri's had not. Instead of scandal, people now spoke of her strength, her calm, and how she'd turned pain into purpose. She didn't want fame, but she knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. It was time to rebuild, not just her business, but her voice. Zuri stood once again where it all began, in the modest office space where she had started ZuriLink Africa years before. This time, the sign on the door read ZuriLink International. She wasn't restarting out of revenge. She was rebuilding with intention. Beside her stood Chuka Obi, her mentor-turned-partner, and Lindai, who had become far more than a housekeeper, her most trusted ally. The new ZuriLink had a different purpose. It wasn't just about logistics anymore. It was about empowerment. Zuri wanted to create opportunities for African women in business who had been silenced, underestimated, or overshadowed, women like she once was. They launched programs to train female entrepreneurs, offered seed funding for startups, and created a mentorship network across the continent. Soon, her story began inspiring thousands. Invitations poured in from around the world. She appeared on talk shows, delivered speeches at universities, and was even invited to speak at a global women's conference. When Zuri stepped on stage, she no longer felt like the woman who once sat quietly beside her husband. She stood tall, confident, her voice carrying power and truth. In one of her TED-style talks, she spoke to a packed hall about resilience. "Success," she said, "isn't about what you build for others. It's about what you rebuild for yourself." The crowd rose to their feet in applause, many with tears in their eyes. Her message began spreading like wildfire online. Clips of her speeches went viral. Women shared stories of how her words gave them courage to leave toxic partnerships, start their own businesses, or demand their rightful place at the table. At a charity gala for her new foundation, which provided grants to single mothers in entrepreneurship, a journalist approached her during an interview. "Zuri," he asked gently, "do you ever regret what you did? Exposing Tobias like that?" Zuri paused, her expression thoughtful but calm. Then she smiled softly, her eyes steady. "I regret staying silent for so long," she said. "Not speaking broke me more than betrayal ever could." That quote spread everywhere. It became a slogan, printed on posters, quoted in articles, repeated in classrooms. Later that night, as the event ended, Zuri looked around the room filled with women who were building, creating, and dreaming because she had dared to speak up. Lindai stood beside her, proud. Zuri smiled quietly to herself. The empire Tobias built had fallen, but from its ashes, she had built something stronger. Not out of revenge, but out of purpose. This time, it wasn't just her company. It was her legacy. It was late in the evening at ZuriLink International. The office lights glowed softly against the city skyline, and most of the team had already gone home. Zuri sat at her desk, reviewing reports for an upcoming project, her focus calm and sharp. The quiet hum of success surrounded her, not loud or flashy, but steady and earned. Then, a familiar voice broke the silence. Zuri. She looked up slowly. Tobias stood at the doorway. He was thinner, his suit worn, his confidence gone. The man who once filled every room with arrogance now looked small, almost fragile. His eyes were tired, his shoulders heavy. Zuri, he said again, stepping closer. I lost everything. The company, the house, the cars, all of it. You won. Zuri studied him for a long moment, her face calm but unreadable. I didn't win, Tobias, she said softly. You just taught me what losing myself looked like. He flinched at her words, lowering his head. I was wrong, he whispered. All those years, I treated you like you didn't matter. But you were the reason any of it worked. Without you, I had nothing. Can you ever forgive me? Zuri leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on the desk. For a while, she said nothing. The silence between them stretched, filled with memories, love, betrayal, humiliation, and the quiet strength that grew from it all. Finally, she stood up. Forgiveness, she said slowly, isn't for you. It's how I free myself. Tobias looked up at her, his eyes glistening with regret. Zuri, please. She shook her head gently. You took my voice once. But you don't get to take my peace now. Her tone wasn't harsh. It was calm, final. She gathered her bag, walked past him, and stopped by the door. For a moment, she looked at the wall where her company's logo shone proudly, ZuriLink International. The name he had erased years ago now stood tall, alive, and hers again. Without another word, she walked out, leaving him standing there, surrounded by the empire she had rebuilt from the ruins of his. Tobias stood in the empty office, staring at the sign. The glow from the logo reflected on his face, and for the first time he seemed to truly see it, her name, her legacy, her power. Everything he once took for granted was now out of his reach. He whispered her name softly, almost to himself, but she was already gone. Outside, the night air was cool, and Zuri felt a strange calm settle over her. She didn't feel anger or triumph, just freedom, the kind that comes from letting go. The man who once thought he owned everything now had nothing, and the woman he once tried to silence had found everything that mattered, her peace, her purpose, and herself. The hall in Nairobi was packed, the air alive with energy and anticipation. Hundreds of women from across the world sat waiting as Zuri Ndlovu stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple white suit, elegant and confident, her presence commanding without needing to try. Behind her, the large screen displayed 3 bold words: rebuild, rise, repeat. The crowd quieted. Zuri looked around, her gaze warm yet powerful. When she began to speak, her voice carried through the room, clear, steady, and full of truth. When someone tells you you're less than what you are, she said, pausing for a moment, remember, their comfort depends on your silence. Break it. The room erupted in applause. Women rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even in tears. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and her words spread instantly across social media. It wasn't just a speech. It was a movement, a reminder that every woman had the power to rebuild her story. Afterward, as the summit ended, Zuri walked out of the convention center into the golden glow of the Nairobi sunset. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the city alive beneath it. Lindai walked beside her, carrying Zuri's bag and beaming with pride. Ma'am, she said softly, smiling, you shattered his empire. Zuri stopped and looked at her, the corners of her lips curving into a calm smile. No, Lindai, she said. I rebuilt my own. They stood there for a moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world that had once tried to silence her was now listening. Zuri took a deep breath, feeling peace settle deep inside her. Her story had begun in pain, but it ended in power. And this time, the light was entirely her own.